Boiling before pots. Imagine a meal before kitchens, before iron, before bronze, before any metal pot exists. There is fire, water, and hunger, but no saucepan. That creates a simple puzzle with enormous consequences. How did humans learn to boil water before metal pots existed? At first, boiling seems to require a container that can sit over flames. Today, we picture heat rising from a stove into a pot, then into water. But early cooks did not need to put the vessel on the fire. They could put the fire into the vessel, one heated stone at a time. The basic trick is called hot stone boiling. Stones are heated in a fire until extremely hot, then transferred into water held in another container. The water absorbs heat from the stones. If enough hot stones are added and replaced as they cool, the liquid can simmer or boil. This reverses modern kitchen logic. The container does not need to survive flames. It only needs to hold water. That matters because many ancient containers were made from materials that burn, soften, or decay: baskets, hides, bark, wood, gourds, and lined pits. A tightly woven basket can hold water for a while if its fibers swell and the weave is sealed with pitch, clay, or natural residues. A wooden bowl can hold liquid, but would char over direct flame. A hide-lined pit can hold water, but cannot become a cooking pot. Hot stones solve the problem. The fire stays outside. The heat travels inward inside rocks. This is not just a clever thought experiment. Experimental archaeology has repeatedly shown that stone boiling works with organic and earthen containers. Researchers can heat suitable stones, drop them into water, and cook foods in vessels that never touch the flame. The technique is slow compared with a modern stove, and it requires attention. Stones must be selected, heated, moved, and replaced. But for people without metal cookware, it could transform what counted as edible, nutritious, or safe. The clearest archaeological clue is often fire-cracked rock. Stones fractured, reddened, blackened, or shattered by repeated heating and cooling. When stones are heated in a hearth and then dropped into water, rapid temperature change can crack them. Clusters of broken, heated rocks near ancient hearths, pits, or activity areas can suggest cooking with stones. However, this evidence is not a perfect label reading "boiling happened here." Fire-cracked rock can come from several heating practices. Stones can crack in earth ovens, roasting features, sweat lodges, hearth construction, or repeated exposure to fire and moisture. So archaeologists look for patterns: the location of stones, associated pits, food residues, burned sediments, and repeated use of the same place. The strongest cases combine many clues rather than relying on one broken rock. Another clue comes from features in the ground: basin-shaped pits, clay-lined depressions, or hearths connected to water heating and food processing. A pit can become a cooking vessel if lined with clay, hide, bark, or another waterproof material. The lining may disappear, especially if it was organic. What remains is the shape, the heat-altered soil, and sometimes the stones. This is one reason early boiling is difficult to date precisely. The most important equipment was often the least likely to survive. Metal pots survive as artifacts. Pottery can survive in fragments. Baskets, hides, bark containers, and wooden vessels usually vanish. Yet vanishing does not mean absent. It means archaeologists must infer behavior from indirect evidence. Basketry impressions preserved in clay, residue traces, tool marks, and ethnographic parallels all help build cautious interpretations. The result is not one single invention date. Boiling likely appeared in different forms, in different places, when people had fire, containers, and useful stones. The stones themselves were not interchangeable. Some rocks handle heat better than others. Some shatter dangerously or crumble. People using hot stones would have learned through experience which stones worked, which cracked, and which left grit in food. Dense, heat-resistant stones could be used repeatedly. Poor choices might explode, shed fragments, or fail to heat the water well. This knowledge was practical, local, and probably taught by observation long before it was ever written down. The containers also varied by environment. In one region, people might use bark or wood. In another, gourds, baskets, or clay-lined pits. Where animals were hunted, hides could be shaped into temporary water containers. Where plants offered strong fibers, basketry could do the job. In many places, people did not need a portable pot at all. A pit in the ground could become a stationary cooking vessel. Water, stones, and food could meet inside that pit while the fire burned nearby. This brings us to the bigger question. Why boil at all? Why not roast everything directly over flames? Roasting is powerful, but it has limits. It burns the outside before the inside softens, and it loses juices, fats, and soluble nutrients. Boiling surrounds food with controlled heat. It softens tough plant tissues, loosens fibers, and makes some roots, seeds, and grains easier to chew. For underground storage organs, tubers, bulbs, and starchy roots, moist heat can be especially useful. Some plants are bitter, fibrous, or difficult to digest when raw. Cooking in water can reduce toughness and help release energy. Boiling also allows foods that would fall apart in a fire to become meals: small seeds, cracked grains, ground plants, and mixed ingredients. A basket or pit of hot water can turn scattered fragments into porridge, broth, or mash. That may sound humble, but it changes the economics of food. Tiny ingredients become worth collecting if they can be cooked together. Boiling also matters for animal foods. Bones, joints, and scraps contain nutrients that roasting cannot easily extract. When bones are simmered, fats and gelatin-rich tissues can loosen into the liquid. In some archaeological contexts, crushed bones and processing traces suggest people were extracting marrow, grease, or fat-rich residues. Not every crushed bone means boiling, but bone grease extraction often benefits from heating in water. Fat was valuable, especially in cold environments or seasons when lean meat alone did not meet energy needs. A potless boiling system could turn leftovers into calories. Broken bones, connective tissues, and small pieces could become broth. This is one reason boiling belongs in the history of survival technology, not just cuisine. It made food more flexible. It allowed people to combine ingredients, stretch resources, and process materials that were otherwise difficult. There is also the issue of safety. Boiling can kill many disease-causing organisms in water and food. We should be careful here. Early humans did not need a germ theory to notice that some cooked foods caused fewer problems than raw ones. They may have learned from taste, smell, texture, repeated experience, and tradition, not from invisible microbes. Still, the biological effect is real. Heating water and food can reduce pathogens and parasites depending on temperature and time. Boiling was not a magical shield. Contamination could still happen afterward, but it was a major step in controlling food risk. The arrival of pottery made boiling easier, but pottery did not invent the idea of heating liquid. Early ceramic vessels gave people containers that could sit near or over fire and survive repeated heating better than baskets or hides. Pottery also left durable evidence. Once clay vessels appear, archaeologists can study sherds, shapes, soot, residues, and useware. Food residues trapped in pottery can reveal fats, plant compounds, or other chemical traces of what was cooked. But this creates a visibility problem. Pottery makes boiling easier to see archaeologically, so it can look more sudden than it was. Before pottery, boiling may have existed in ways that left fewer obvious remains. The history of boiling is therefore partly a history of missing materials. Imagine an ancient cooking area after abandonment. The hide rots, the basket decays, the wooden bowl disappears. What remains are stones, stains in soil, charcoal, pits, and maybe microscopic residues. From these fragments, archaeologists reconstruct actions: heating stones, moving them, adding water, cooking plants, rendering fat. The reconstruction is strongest when the pieces fit together and when experiments show the process is physically plausible. Experimental archaeology is useful because it turns a hypothesis into a testable action. Can a basket hold water long enough? Can stones raise it to a boil? How many stones are needed? What happens to the rocks afterward? Do they crack in ways similar to archaeological examples? These experiments cannot prove that a specific ancient group used the method on a specific day. But they show that the technique is workable, efficient enough, and capable of producing the material traces found at some sites. They also reveal the skill involved. Stone boiling is not simply dropping random rocks into water. Cooks must manage temperature, avoid ash, remove cooled stones, prevent spills, and keep the container from tearing or tipping. In a clay-lined pit, the challenge is different. The cook maintains the lining, controls mud and sediment, and keeps stones circulating. In a basket, heat must be added gradually enough to avoid damaging the container while still cooking the food. This kind of knowledge does not look like machinery, but it is technology, a system of materials, timing, memory, and repeated practice. And like many ancient technologies, it probably had many inventors, not one. Wherever people had fire, water, containers, and suitable stones, the possibility existed. So how did humans boil water without pots? Often by heating stones in fire and placing them into water held by organic containers, lined pits, or early ceramics. The exact beginnings are hard to see because the oldest containers disappeared. But boiling did not begin with metal. It began when stone carried fire into water.